Hello, I'm WP Suazo, and this video's topic is structural and cyclical debt. Let me begin by defining what these two terms mean. Structural means at full GDP. Structural does not allow any cyclicality into the discussion. So structural simply means at full GDP. So how are times under a structural analysis? Always normal, always at full. There's no boom, there's no recession through the lens of structural analysis. Things are always at normal. Conversely, cyclical does the opposite. If we're in an upswing or downswing, cyclical tells you how far from normal. So cyclical answers how far from full GDP. All right, I have a identity up here. I have a matrix to fill in, but before I get to that, let me introduce the graph here. Graph has GDP along the bottom. So this is GDP, how much commerce. Full GDP is at 1,000. Along the vertical axis, we have public money. We're committed to spending no matter what. Government budget of 200, no matter what. Taxes are represented by these oblique or diagonal lines. So we look at this lowest tax rate, it's taking 167 from 1,000, so 0.167 is this lowest tax rate. You may have saw me erase it earlier. This middle tax rate takes 200 from 1,000, so 0.2 is this tax rate, and the highest tax rate takes 240 from 1,000, so that's 0.24. 0.20 is an easy number to work with, and we know that 20% of 1,200 is 240, and that's what it is. So this works out. Okay. If government purchases are always 200, let us write that in now. So we have this definition across the top of the board. So G is always 200. So let us put that in. So I put it in here. Do I see G elsewhere? Yes, I do. I see it here. So let me put it in here. So G is always 200. Okay. So what does this say? This says whatever commerce or GDP is, we apply a tax rate to get tax revenue. From that tax revenue, we take out the government budget. That gives us the budget status, whether we are in deficit or surplus. However, we can find that same deficit or surplus if we take what normal tax revenues are, take out our spending commitments or the public budget. That gives us a structural component. And then we look to see just how tax revenues are doing. Now, so this is how actual tax revenues are collecting minus what we expect them to get our cyclical component. In reality, government purchases are also cyclical. They also vary. But in this model, we're going to have government purchases locked in like block grants. Okay, so let us begin. Let us say that we begin at full GDP with a middle tax rate. So from 1,000 GDP, we take 20%. So our tax revenues are 200. Our government spending is 200. The budget here is in balance. T full. Well, what's our tax rate? 20%. So we look here and we say, all right, 20% can be many things, but if it's T full, we may only look over F. So we have 200. So we have 200 minus 200. So in terms of policy, our system has no surplus, it has no deficit. Right, T full, we plug it in, and we are actually collecting 200. So the budget or the tax revenues are varying none. They are right on target. Okay. Now let us say this economy goes into recession. So GDP falls to 833. And we're taking 20% of that. Now, don't let me get this wrong. So we have 20%, we have 833. So right here, 167. We're taking in 167. We're committed to spending 200. we are in deficit by 33. Now, whom is to blame for that deficit of 33? Our policies or the economy? Did we change the tax rate? No, we did not. 20%, 20%, consistently 20%. So if the tax rate's the same, T-full is the same. So our policies are still in balance. They're not surplus, no deficit. We were expecting to collect 200, but instead we took in 167. So this deficit is a product of the economy, not our policies. All right, so here we are. We are right here. We are in recession, and we're using this middle tax rate. Since we're locked in at G of always 200, we can't stimulate the economy with new programs. So what we have to do is we have to cut taxes. That's our only means to stimulate the economy. So here we are in recession at 833. Now we're going to cut taxes down to 0.167. And that brings in 139. So now we are in deficit by 61, and the critics are howling. They're saying this current administration is going to bring the government to ruin. Who is to blame for this deficit of 61? Well, the blame is shared between the economy and the policy of the current government. We did change the tax rate, hence we must change the structural component. T-full is what this asks. 16.7% can be many things, but what is it over full? Well, here's full. Over full, it is 167. So, our policies are only shorting the public budget by 33. Our policies are only resulting in a deficit of 33 because 0.167 tax percent over full, if the economy is where it should be, result in revenues of 167. We're always committed to government a budget of 200. So the policies have a deficit of 33. Looking over here, our actual tax revenues are 139. I plug in this 167, and tax revenues are lagging. Tax revenues are lagging, and they're lagging by 28. They're lagging by 28. All right. So if that were 140, this would be 27. One more 28. If we look at this, this is 50. 61. Good. So, of this deficit of negative 61, 33 of it is to blame because of policy, but 28 of it is to blame because of the slow or sour economy. All right? Let's say because of this tax cut, the economy comes rifling back. The economy comes surging back. We have a huge recovery. So now we started here. We receded back here. Now the economy comes roaring back. And we still have the same tax policy in place. What is 16.7% of 1,200? Well, use the graph. Here's 16.7%, here's 1,200. Tax revenues are 200. Now, this current administration might say, well, we balance the budget. No. The current government is not balancing the budget, the current economy is. If the tax rates stay the same, then the structural component is also the same. So the current policies result in a deficit of 33. If the budget is balanced, then the current tax revenues must be ahead by positive 33. And let's see if that pans out. We plug this in. And right, current tax revenues are 200. So here's what's happening. Our current policies are in deficit by 33, but our current tax collections are sweet by 33. So what's happening is our system's deficit is being perfectly eclipsed by the great economic times. Okay? So, what happens? GDP of 1,200, that's 20% beyond full. We are risking inflation. Also, look at these deficits here. we have a cumulative national debt of 94, so we have to pay for that, and we pay for that by raising taxes. Okay, so how far are we going to raise taxes to? Well, let's be extreme. Let's raise them to 24. So we're going to take almost a quarter of this. A quarter of this would be 300, so it actually works out to be 288. So the critics of this policy will howl that the government is taking too much in tax revenues. And how can the government respond to that? Well, first let's find out what the actual surplus is. The actual surplus is 88, because we're taking in 288, we're always committed to spending 200. But is the government really taking 88? It is taking 88, but it doesn't mean to take 88. It's not taking 88 surplus through design. So let's see here. 24% over full, T full. Here's 24%, but over full, the tax revenues would be 240. So I take this 240 and I plug it in. So we have 240 minus 200. So the current policies are intended to result in a deficit of 40, but we're actually having a deficit of 88. Where does the overcollection come from? The overcollection comes from the fact that the economy is booming. So, of this surplus of 88, 40 of it comes from policy, but the remaining 48 comes from the fact that tax collections are burgeoning so far ahead of where we expect them. So we haven't paid off our national debt, but we've come close. So 88 of a 91 national debt. To end things, let's say the economy settles at full. So we are at full of 1,000. Yes, and to be at full, we have to come back to 1,000, not 1,100, not 1,200, but 1,000. So we have 240 being collected. We're committed to spending 200. We have a surplus of 40. Did we change the tax rate? Did we change the tax rate? No, we did not. So this structural component right here is intact. It's still at 40. We collected 240. We intended to collect 240, so there's no cyclical component. So now we have a national surplus like the Norwegians, okay, or the Finns. So I hope this has shed a lot of light on structural and cyclical deficits and surpluses. Thank you for watching.